Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, which is the 9001 2015 Plan and Leadership section. Oh, can we hear me? Good. Okay, sorry about that. Technology is a challenge for us all, I think, at the moment. So we're going to be discussing leadership and planning in the sense of 9001. So I just want to start, just in case people are on that haven't got the certification yet, of what quality management is. So it's a system to ensure consistency and conformance by the processes that the business creates themselves. The standard allows you to apply a logical process in order to achieve this, and the certification that we provide shows a conformance to an international standard. And it makes things easier if you're wanting to tender for contract and get through approved supply lists as well, because they have the confidence in the certification. You'll get a copy of the presentation via email after we've finished, and you can type questions, which is in the little question box there. I'll be answering those at the end if that's all right. If you think of something later on, please feel free to email me. Again, you'll get a copy of these slides, so my email address is on there, and perfectly happy to respond to any queries that you might have. A significant aspect to 9001 is risk management, and as we know, at the moment there is huge risk to businesses across the country. The way we've responded to this really is to hopefully, I've got no audio coming up on a few. Okay, hopefully I've resolved that now. The way that we've responded to this is to show some support to leaders of businesses by putting together this presentation. So we understand sometimes auditors, we can do ISO speak, and it doesn't properly translate into how you can use the standard to your advantage. And the idea of this is to show you a practical implementation for the risk management. So what we're going to talk about is how to plan for immediate legislation changes. We've put together a checklist to cover the bases of how you're going to apply the planning and leadership, how to plan for quality continuity, staff training welfare plans, and ensuring that your products, your projects and your services can continue even if you've got to diversify what you're doing at the moment. So change has obviously got to happen. It's not something as humans we're always comfortable with, but when we're thinking about change with this webinar, we're inviting you to put the thought into the risk mitigation to protect the business and therefore your staff, and also changing to comply with statutory and regulatory requirements. I've chosen this quote really because everybody is adapting. I think there was a poll in the press saying that only 9% of people want to go back to work in the way that we were originally. And in order to facilitate the change that we've all experienced, companies are going to have to plan to adapt to meet that. Don't believe everything that you read in the press. Obviously 9% possibly isn't an accurate figure, but I think we will find that a lot of people have found a better balance with work-life balance, and you know, we might be able to move forward a bit with that. So two major changes since coronavirus has started has been the Health Protection Coronavirus Regulations 2020, and I've put a link in here. So if you want to have a look at that, it doesn't tell you too much, then by all means fill your boots. I'm not going to pretend that I can interpret this legislation at all, but ostensibly it's a new regulation which relates to powers of Secretary of State and the isolation of people who have been infected or suspect they've been infected with coronavirus. So it's a good idea, or it might be prudent to assume it could be a long-term regulation and plan as if it is going to remain in force when lockdown eases. So as yet, you'll be aware that nobody is 100% certain of the long-term effects of the virus, or whether people can catch it once, twice, 3 times. And it's a really good idea to seek some legal advice from a competent person to ensure that your current policies are not going to violate any regulations if people require future isolation and sick time. So this is a change that we do need to plan for. Most sick policies may now be out of date, and as part of leadership and accountability, it's a good idea to get that checked out. So we know that's a regulation, it's a statutory instrument, but at the time of this writing, furlough is not in any statute in the legal system, and it's a mechanism to assist businesses with cash flow and also enable your staff to have some funds coming in. So it's not a negative strategy at all. It's an opportunity. It's going to give you some breathing room so you can plan for the future. And we will be looking after staff later within this webinar. So it's a good thing. So what does it mean in practical terms? Your staff are going to be paid 80% of the wages by the government, up to £2,500. Because it's not in a statute, we have to consider that where contracts are in place, that's how we're going to find legal premise or solutions. So contracts which you'd need to consider perhaps are employment contracts. If you've not got employment contracts in place, you might want to consider re-evaluating this, or if they're not robust, it might be the case of when people return back to work that their role might be different. You might actually be looking at what people are doing now they're away from the workplace and thinking, actually, I didn't realise how much that person did. You might need to just look at what do people do, and actually, are you complying with their employment contract? So generally, a contract will trump a government assistance scheme. So it's important that you have an understanding of what's happening with that. You might have commercial contracts. A lot of our clients work internationally, so it's possible that jurisdictions may interfere. For example, if you've committed in a contract that you will provide X amount of work or you'll provide X amount of materials, you need to ensure that whilst we're in shutdown and you've got a reduction of staff or lack of availabilities of materials, that you're not actually breaching that contract. So it's important, with all that taken into consideration, that you get the right advice. If you go onto Google, you can put in writing a contract, you can put in discrimination cases, anything like that, and you'll get tons and tons of results. These are all based on precedents and things which have already happened. They've already been spoken about in court, and there's already a decision there for you. The word unprecedented, however, has been used daily since this outbreak. So there's not really any precedents to follow in this instance. And it's important to consider who is advising you on how to manage the legalities and the finances of the company. So this is an essential part of your planning and your leadership, because we must get this element right. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. It sounds a negative, possibly, but it's a risk mitigation, and particularly if you haven't got the correct legal and finance strategy in place, everything else that you do put in place that follows may come apart. So when you're considering who's competent to provide advice for legal and accounting, it's advisable to consider if they are a fully qualified solicitor or chartered accountant. So if we go back to basic economics, it's a case of how much can your business afford to take a hit if this person gets it wrong. So do they have the relevant competence? Can they evidence it to you? There is nothing wrong with legal advisors. There is nothing wrong with bookkeepers. But in this instance, you have to consider, have they got the resources should you need to take a redress, for example? So you know, if you've got a law firm or a well-established accounting firm, if the advice that they provide you in the future doesn't turn out to be not incorrect, but you were ill-advised, then you have got a regulatory body who you can go to and you can take action against it, and you know that they will have the financial resources to potentially pay those damages back to you. You also need to consider your insurance. Who are you insured to take advice from? And it's always worth covering these bases, because as I say, if you can't afford to take that hit, and we don't know what may come in the future, then at least you can say, well, I've done all I reasonably can to mitigate that risk. So if you haven't got a solicitor, I've put this website here. It's the Law Society.org. It's an impartial government website, and you can pop in your area and the area of law you want to speak about, and you'll get accredited, regulated law firms on there. And the same for accountants as well. There was quite a few bodies out there, but if you wanted to have a look on this website, it gives you advice on checking the credentials of anybody that you might want to use to help you plan your finances for the future. So that's the first part of the checklist. And once we've done that, and once we know that we've got competent advice to take us forward, you might want to consider, if you've still got workers operating at the moment, this is a really nice way of checking that you've planned and making sure we've done all that we can to assist with the current COVID-19. And of course, generally when we come out and audit you for the 2001, we'll ask you what you've done in the last 12 months. We're now probably going to be asking, well, we are asking on audits for what you're doing now as part of your planning. I've just had a question come through to help people in Scotland to find a solicitor, so I will add that onto the slides for when they get sent out. Thank you very much. So at the moment, if you're currently in work, we need to assign responsibility for a planning and preparedness to senior executive and a deputy. If you're a smaller company, that's probably going to fall to those in the leadership, and one for Ireland as well. Yes, I'll do that. Thank you very much. The information on COVID-19, all we can really go off is what the government's telling us at the moment, and there's a massive amount of information on all the government websites. You will have consulted with the company and your workers and your representatives. You need to consult with your suppliers on measures they're taking. Now, from audits that I've completed personally over the past few weeks, I know that there's an issue with actual suppliers. In some cases, they've shut down completely. Also relying on other parts of Europe getting materials in. So it's probably a nice thing to do is find out lead times, and also, are they preparing to recover? What's the sort of measures they're going to take to ensure their own staff are safe? We clearly need to assess high-level impact on your business and take priority to the planning processes. Well, that's what we're doing now, and we'll also be looking at the business continuity plan. So you could use this, if you want, to check, have we done it? Have we done it? It's really easy to offer advice when you're not in that situation. But I can imagine for leaders of businesses, with all this happening, tons of questions from people, it's easy for something to get missed. And it might just be a sanity check. Have we done this? Have we ensured this is absolutely right? When your workers are coming back, it might be an idea to continue ticking off what we're doing. So what are critical activities? What inputs do we need? If you've done internal audits in the past that have been successful, what you might find is you've already answered these questions for yourself, but everything's changed. So we do need to readdress these issues and find out, what do we actually do? What strategies have we put in place? And again, these are just little tick boxes that can help you do that. Cross-training, we're going to talk about later. Preparing emergency communications plans. I'm going to guess most of us have already done this, either with remote working or with your key workers that are still operating, that we're actually communicating what's going on, any hygiene changes that you've made, or the social distancing that's been put in place. And again, this is what we've just spoken about, preparing policies, ensuring that this is correct, that it's relevant and it's compliant. This part of your checklist, you could use, again, you're going to have a copy of this, so I'm not going to read it out to you word for word, but you might find that once we come out of lockdown as such, there will still be some measures in place. So we need to start planning where we can put hygiene areas in. It might be really simple. Nobody's suggesting that you start installing loads of sinks and shower areas and spending a fortune, but you might want to consider a hygiene policy that you can put in place so that, you know, when you're entering or leaving an area, that you're making sure that hands are washed, that there's proper PPE, which again is an issue globally, I think, at the moment. And consider flexible working and policies for that. I think something that we've most definitely learned is that there is no requirement for 100% of the staff force to be in the workplace, which is good, and we'll come on to that. So quality continuity is going to be absolutely vital. This is where the gold is, really. Nobody likes to do an internal audit, is the the feedback that we sometimes get from clients, but it's the most productive time for you to do that. The internal audit is going to allow you to see bird's eye, helicopter view, however you want to put it, what is happening within your business while it's quieter. If you're still fully operational, then it's an even better time to do it as well, because you can actually see the effectiveness of whatever processes that you've put in place. So we need to identify what processes have been affected. If it's a case of you're in a complete shutdown, then it's a good opportunity to have a little look at what do we do. So if you're in manufacturing, your main process is obviously going to be operations. If you're in market research, it's going to be market research. If you're in recruitment, whatever business you're in, we need to assess how much of that is shut down, how much we can get back on board, and if we are to diversify, what can we utilise? The operational side of the business is your priority, of course, when you're ready. So what state are we actually in? If the if the country reopens tomorrow, are you ready to go? Have you got the staff capacity? Are we going to have absences? It's important to address these questions and plan ahead, because if you have, unfortunately, an illness within your workforce and you're down 50%, we need to be planning to ensure that we can, for want of a better word, replace people or get temporary staff in who can come in and fill those roles until they're hopefully able to come back to work. It's no good if we have a warehouse full of stock and nobody to move them. So this is a constant monitor which you need to be planning and preparing for. We spoke earlier about finding out where your suppliers are at. It's an excellent time to audit your suppliers. We need to check their availability. We need to supply lead times. We need to also consider that despite amazing relationships that we have with suppliers, that it's possible you might have to source from somewhere or someone else. It could be a short-term measure, or actually you might find that you're able to get a better or a different service. I don't think anybody will come out of this well if we don't all work together as businesses within the economy. I don't think anybody wants to gazump anybody, and I certainly don't think that anyone's going to be picking clients or trying to take business away from anybody, because that's just completely wrong in these times. But as leaders, you're in a bit of a position, really, aren't you? Because you have to look after your people, you have to put them first, but at the same time, you have to ensure that there's something for them to come back to, and ensure that they can still come to work. So it's something to consider. Some of your suppliers might be able to tell you that they're just not going to be open for 6 weeks, and have the open discussion. Do you mind if I go to somebody else because I really need this, or we're preparing for this? And it's not about giving commercial sensitivity away. You're just communicating that we will come back to you, and keep them going as well, because they're going to keep you going, hopefully, in the future. You need to monitor stock. So again, you can see this process of looking straight for the operation. Let's hit the ground running. If you've got anything perishable, is there anything you can do with it? Temperature controlled, who's checking on this? Under or overstocking. So earlier, I think it was last year, when we had the Brexit situation, and there was loads of stockpiling. I think it was the most successful year for a lot of manufacturers and warehousing, and it was just mental for about 3 months, and it just stopped completely, because nobody needed to buy anything. I think there was a concern about whether we'd be able to import and export with Brexit, and they've come through that quite well and quite successfully, and it's balanced itself out. So if the stock you don't need, or an overstock, can we do something else with it? Now's a great time to think about what you're producing, whether it's a service or whether it's a product. Is there anything else that you can do with it? So we get very set in our ways, I think, don't we? And we look at what we're doing and say, does it work? Yes, it does. So we don't really need to do anything. There's the old saying, isn't there? If it's not broken, don't try and fix it. But we're not in our comfort zone, and we do have to think about what can we do with our stock. Document control, this is very audity. I'll make no apology for it, because I'm an auditor and it's a 9001 presentation. Your quality management system is changing as the time goes on. So we have to consider, and the way that the standard is actually written for quality management is it follows really clear, recognised business processes. So your context is likely to change. It might be the case that you have a scope for which we provide certification for that might need to be adapted. It might change because instead of producing, for example, putting water in water bottles, you might now be producing hand sanitizer, or you might be producing visors for the NHS, which is probably different to what you would be doing earlier. So that doesn't mean that your certification needs to change, but it means that your processes do. And it's worth, if you're wanting to discuss scope, talking with your key account manager about that, and seeing if there's anything we need to do with it. But your entire context of your business is different. Your objectives are likely to have changed. So when we talk about quality objectives, what we often see is, I want to maintain 9001 certification, which isn't a particularly, it's not wrong because it's your objective, but it's not going to add much value. So what value can you put in place now? What is the key thing? If we audit you next year and say, well, what did you do in COVID-19, and your objective was stay in business, that's great, but we'll need to see a lot of planning as to how you've come to that objective and how you've planned ahead for that. An objective that you might want to consider is increasing your internal audit schedule, for example. So if you've introduced remote working and that's not something that would normally happen within your business, then you would need to have a process in place for that. You need to show us how you've planned for that event, and it's another process for you to internally audit. You probably find that you've done this already because you have to plan to get people at home. You'll have had to have tested the internet connection, the technology, the software, and ensure that everybody's on board with that. So these are things you are likely doing, but it's important that we can see how you've done that. The staff structure is likely to have changed. So again, we need to control these documents and potentially a service. We've spoken about that. You might be producing something completely different or change your service slightly. But by updating these and going through this logical process, hopefully it will produce some ideas on how you move forward. It might identify that actually you're spending too much money in an area and not enough somewhere else. It'll also help you see if you are compliant to statutory and regulatory requirements, which is obviously a big part. A good way, if you're not wanting to go around with your clipboard and start sampling things for an internal audit, a full process, is a value chain analysis. So this is a personal favourite tool of mine. You might have other ideas on how you want to do it, but it gives you a clear focus of what we're actually doing, a big holistic view. So you might recognise infrastructure from the 9001 standard, and you might recognise that these are processes that you likely have in your quality manual or however you've presented your QMS for us. And what we'll be looking at within this is how does the operation work? What bits can change? And of course, this all will lead to your margin. The important thing, as well as making sure your processes are up to date and compliant, is to have a look. Where can we save money? Where are we losing money? When we get back, what is going to generate the most income and the most value to the business? You might have a variety of activities within your organisation, and it might be the case that when you go back to work, you don't need to have them all functioning. These little tools will help you come to that. So we know support activities realistically aren't really going to make you any profit, so to speak. These are enabling the primary activities which will create revenue and is the backbone of your business. That's how you're going to survive. Things to think about then. It's not going to bring anything in for you. Do they need to be on site? Is there anywhere that you could save on overheads or travel? Again, get that advice from somebody qualified to give it to you, but it's worth just working out how much do we spend on support. The VRIO model is another tool that you can use to do this. So once we've established what are we spending money on, where can we save the money, we can then plan, can we do something new? I like this model particularly because it's, again, a logical process, and it's just a tick box really of what are we doing. When we speak to businesses a lot, we talk about customer satisfaction, and we'll say, can you demonstrate how people are satisfied? And generally what they'll have in their policy is that they exceed customer expectation, they exceed and enhance. When we ask, how do you do that? It's rare that we can get a really good answer about it. This is a nice way to show in your planning how you can justify things such as this. Obviously, when we return back to normal as such, we're going to be in a massively competitive market. So it is time to actually assess, rather than this is what we do and we think we're excellent and we think that we're the best at everything, is to look again at competitors and see how are we and what do we do to change that and use this little bit of downtime to really develop what sets you apart and plan how you implement that and plan how you get this out to your customers. So while we're on with that, we need to start thinking about staff a little bit. So this follows on with your value chain. So while you're looking at your operations and you're looking at your infrastructure, you're probably going to identify roles which are critical. And now we know that we need to establish any mitigations that might need to be put in place, and training needs to support that. So a lot of the time we'll look at a risk register so that people can evidence we're managing risk. And whenever we say to people, well, what happens if you have no staff? We've always got staff. What happens if, you know, everybody wins the lottery and nobody wants to come in the next day? How do you ensure that the business thrives? I think we're still having some problems with sound. Keep getting little things bobbing up. Sorry about that. We can see now that when we are making these crazy comments of what if, during COVID-19, it's happened. So we need to ensure that if somebody who is critical to the actual business is either going to need to be absent through illness, or because they want to pursue something different, or they need more time off, that we have somebody within the business who can take on that role and mitigate that risk if that person can't be available. We can keep people busy by doing training at home if your furlough agreement allows this. So you will have hopefully made agreements with your staff when they've gone off for furlough of what they can and can't do. Hopefully we're all aware that what they absolutely cannot do is anything in terms of working for the business or putting things on social media which might assist the business. They have to be completely out of it. And I believe there's going to be audits from the government for anyone involved in that scheme. And I believe that if you caught having asked your staff to work, or your staff have worked whilst on furlough, you're probably going to forfeit any assistance which you've received from the government. If you're going to diversify and retain your staff, hopefully, they may need additional training. So it's a good time to look at what people have and haven't got. So if somebody's a forklift driver, but you now require them to become a welder, what do they need? I know that's a bit of a bizarre analogy, but we can't just take people from a job that they are used to doing and ask them to do something completely different. It might be an internal training that you need to put in place. It might be a case of you want somebody who's qualified as an engineer, but they're working as something else because they enjoy that, to now draw on that qualified experience. You might be aware that qualifications with expiry dates, such as first aid and professional construction qualifications, now have a 6-month grace period. So whereas if it expires maybe 1st of June, you've now got a further 6 months on that, but you're going to have to plan that absence for the staff to refresh and manage what could be a critically busy time for you. So by getting everything in place of what your suppliers can do, what new or continuing work you're going to do, you should hopefully be able to plan when your busiest time is going to be and when the peak is going to start again for you. You might have identified that some roles will be less busy. So we spoke about, you know, we'll have some really busy departments or busy areas within your business. Can't really expect that everybody is going to be full throttle straight away. So it might be an idea to get a buddy system in place. So again, we're going to cross-train people perhaps, so that if there's illness, if people leave, then you have somebody who can do that job. It's not dismissing anybody's role and saying, well, anybody can do that job. You are going to have to suitably consider who has the ability to be a multi-skilled and cross-trained person. Something which I've spoken about on audits with leaders of the business is that some staff who've been furloughed haven't really got any contact with the business. So although they can't do any work for you and they can't bring any benefit, for want of a better word, to the business, you are allowed to contact them if your agreement allows that. So things that you can do just to keep everybody engaged a little bit is maybe a weekly quiz. You can do that virtually. You can have little catch-ups. You can do a book club, which is something NQA are doing. You could have film club, or even have a little virtual drink on a Friday. This is good for people because it's very odd, I'm sure you'll agree, going from seeing people 5 days a week, you build up relationships, you build up friendships, and you spend more time with them than you probably do with loved ones at home. To suddenly lose that contact is quite difficult. So you might want to consider as well putting in place something to assist your staff's mental health. So it's good to put it in now so they have an option if they're struggling at home, which a lot of people are, and upon return as well, because that is going to be difficult. Just as everyone's got used to being 24/7 with the families, we're now asking them, let's come back to work and knuckle down. I think you'll accept most people are going to be quite sluggish and very tired in the first few days, maybe weeks of coming back. So it's good if you can offer that mental health support for them. You might have people who have really enjoyed working at home and they've found that they want to do that from now on. Again, going back to the contract situation, is this something that you might be able to do? Get some advice on that if that situation occurs. You might need to reinduct employees into work when they come back. So people will be scared. Have we actually got the health and safety in place so that there's nothing lurking about? Routines changed for them. If you're going to be changing how the business operates also, people will need to be aware of that and reinducted. Something you might want to consider is sending birthday cards. So people who live on their own or don't like being stuck in with the family, some people find it really, really hard. It's just nice, isn't it? If you feel valued by your employer, it costs very little. And it just shows that you are actually thinking of them while they're off. It's equally important for the leaders of the business to ask how people are doing. So although the furlough is a really positive thing, and it's great that people aren't being just left with nothing and it's helping the business out, it is causing financial impact for some people. Childcare issues and trying to juggle working and screaming children and also having to teach them at the same time as well must be really, really difficult. And people feeling unwell. I've spoken to a few businesses who've been quite affected by COVID in terms of either staff having it or family members having it. And it's just nice to show that you are thinking of them, that you do care about them, because ultimately when we come back to work, these are the people who are going to ensure your business stays open. So we've looked at covering the bases to ensure that you're prepared and compliant, how to assess the business in a practical way, and how to respond to training gaps. And this final section of the webinar is going to look at how we now implement continuity. Mike Venner, our NQA Technical Director, is holding a specific webinar for manufacturing. That's Meet the COVID-19 Manufacturing Challenge, and that's 20th of April at 3 p.m. And that's probably going to be useful for that industry in particular. And this is more of a generic for everybody. So using the value chain analysis tool, we can hopefully see where costs are occurring, what's generating income, where we may save the costs on overheads using technology and remote working, and possibly you'll see potential to diversify your business. Now we need to consider the environment and the strategy. Environmental change and market, this is really quite significant. So if we're not going to plan for change and adaptation, historical evidence will show that you are likely to struggle to succeed. The market is completely changed and it is currently geared towards responding to COVID-19. It's not capitalism to respond by providing or making an income out of this. It's ensuring that the people that you're looking after, by asking them to stay away, have something to come back to. And the worst thing that you could possibly do in this situation is do nothing and wait for the country to reopen. You really must take this opportunity to make use of the planning. Beg your pardon, I think I've got the wrong date there. I think it's 30th of April. Thank you very much for pointing that out to me. Go back on that one. So this is a basic model. You may have seen it before, what happens with strategic drift. Phase 1 and 2 are generally when we can make changes to the business which will be successful theoretically. Unfortunately, we're all being thrown into phase 3 almost automatically. So what this means is we haven't had enough time maybe in phase 1 and 2 to see what's happening in the markets, what's happening around us, and making small changes which can make us successful in adapting to how the markets are now moving forward. When we don't adapt, we drift away, and what we're doing becomes a little bit less relevant to what is needed. So climate, where businesses are losing money, and equally employees haven't had as much money to spend, we have to sort of look at, well, what are people actually going to spend money on? Is it what we are producing? Is it what we are providing? And if it's not, what do we need to do about it? I know that it probably sounds quite repetitive in what I'm saying to you, but it's so important that we evaluate the response to ensure that you stay open. If we go into panic mode completely without a thoroughly thought out strategic plan, automatically we're going to flux. We haven't had time to test it. We haven't had time to work out. And this research stage that we would normally get in phase 1 really, or prior to phase 1, is going to be a little bit hit and miss. But by speaking with suppliers, by speaking with competitors in your business, and by speaking with other producers, you should hopefully be able to work out a little way forward, make new connections, make new networks, and hopefully we will have a transformation. So what can you do? Can you make PPE? Now I wrote this yesterday, and then I saw an article in the news last night that a business had been doing this, and he's spent thousands of pounds providing materials and paying his staff force to come on board and ensure that the NHS has got visors, and now he can't get paid. So I would say that there's a caveat with this in terms of, if you're going to go down the making the PPE route and you're going to provide things for the NHS, that maybe you're doing that in conjunction with somebody who is already an approved supplier, or get the assurance that you are going to get paid for that work. We know that the government says that at the moment they're working with 1,000 suppliers. 159 of those allegedly are in Britain. So it's good, if you can do any of this, to get that assurance. If you've got a fleet of transport, can you hire it out? Are you able to lots of things flashing up. Has anybody? Yeah, okay, so someone's just made a comment there, which is a really good point. PPE needs CE marking, and having PPE that does not work correctly increases the risk. Care should be taken. So totally agree with that, which is again why I'm saying speaking with suppliers and working with other people to ensure that it is correct. But that is a fantastic point, and I should have made that clear. Thank you very much. If you've got a fleet of transport, are you able to hire it out? Obviously, you'd need to ensure that your insurance is covered with all of that. What it's going to be used for, if the transport is suitable for what people want. Is now the time to develop a product. So the only thing I thought of really, and I'm not an engineer, so this is a daft idea, was if you can develop something that reduces necessity to touch contaminated PPE. If you can loan out robotic arms or anything like that. So it leads to, can you loan equipment? There might be lots of things that you have within your. Have you got the ability to rent your premises out? So it's just little. Well, it's not a little thing, that really, is it? But can you recruit for healthcare professionals? So the industrial side of recruitment is suffering at the moment because of the closure of the warehouses. However, you could diversify and move into healthcare. If you're in electrics or woodwork, engineering, is there any equipment that you can supply to hospitals? So they're absolutely pushed to the maximum at the moment, and we know that obviously essential maintenance is going to have to take place. Can you get involved in those contracts? Can you liaise with current suppliers and support them? Or could you appreciate this isn't going to solve everybody's issues, but it's something to consider. So we are apparently still having problems with audio. I apologise for that. You will get a recording of this, so you won't miss out. So apologies for that. Potential mistakes to avoid is building on the familiar. So if you're struggling, the answers which you turn into at the moment, if they're not working, you need to think outside the box. Maybe we're not asking the correct questions. So we've not been involved in a global pandemic before, so it's going to be difficult to work out what those questions are. But the familiar has to change. And we spoke at the beginning about how change, it's got to be positive. We've got to do it. We've got to adapt. So if your normal answers that you would come up with, they might not be the correct ones, and you've got to take a bit of a punt. Core rigidities. So over time, processes become rigid, and it's because it's difficult to change and embed. It's important that you communicate changes to your staff. It's really important that you explain why as well. Everybody wants to be the boss and everyone can do your job better than you. That's what people generally think, isn't it? I'm sure you've heard it before. But if you explain to people the reason why you're putting processes in place, it's to protect them. It's to ensure they've got a job. It's to ensure that the company can continue. And it might not work, but the thing is, people can see that you're trying. It's more important to get that buy-in and lead that forward. A few may recognise this. So relationships lock-in. So long-standing relationships with customers and suppliers might restrict your ability to change. So you have to look how to enter new markets at this point, and you have to be able to ensure that the markets you're going into, you can actually thrive and succeed in. Now, it's possible that the customers that you have, and everybody appreciates customers, everyone appreciates good suppliers, might not be able to assist with that. And you maybe have to plan or think of an evaluation of which is actually going to help you survive in it. If you're not able to do it, then emerging entrants will. And it's a case of weighing up pros and cons of that. The lag performance efforts is something which I discuss regularly with clients. So in order to meet demand, loyal customers and cost cuttings and higher efficiencies sometimes hide issues within the company stability. So on paper, it looks like we're doing okay, we're making a lot, but actually it's the cost it takes to get to that. So by speaking with your accountant, by speaking with your management team, it's a good opportunity for you to see where we're lacking. Have we overworked? Have we cut costs too much? Are we bowing to the customer too much as well? Nobody wants to pay for anything these days. I think that's a problem that a lot of companies who sell a product will have. But although we're trying to thrive, and keep customers, are we making a profit from that? Are we actually making any money, or are we just paying for materials, paying for work, and not really making anything? So what we've discussed has covered a business strategy, a variety of strategies for planning and leadership. And although the language I've used is not the same language that you'll find in the ISO 9001 standard, this is what it's all about. So what we've looked at, and these are what's in the standard really, is planning to address risk and opportunities. And it's never, ever, ever before been so crucial. We've looked at setting objectives and how they're going to bring value to your business, and that we need to communicate these to the staff. And we've looked at evaluating the success of the planned changes. Again, this is all in the 9001 standard. And the evaluation of these changes is critical. There is no point putting the planning in place, running with it, and then finding out in 6 months that actually that wasn't the route that we needed to take. We've looked at accountability in terms of you as the business leaders or the quality representatives. You have got a lot on your shoulders at the moment, and I think you're brilliant for seeing it through. It's not an easy time. We're ensuring the QMS is successful and that processes are integrated. So anything that we're changing, anything that we're looking at doing differently, this is where your QMS needs a little bit of a revamp, a little bit of a refresh. And we've looked at communicating the staff and assigning more roles and responsibilities. I'm really sorry for those who've had issues with sound. I have seen a few up as I've gone through the presentation, but if anyone's got any questions, then I'd be happy to take them. Thank you for listening. Okay, so I've just been asked, we have a reassessment this year, so planned over a 2-day audit. How is this going to work remotely? Great question. Okay, so what we've been doing with the remote audits is ensuring that we can get as much done as possible. So depending on your industry, there might be things which we can't do remotely. If we've got to go through loads of materials and what have you, then it's likely that we might have to split it. Not knowing what your business is, I'm really sorry I can't give you a clearer answer, but we can audit your management system. So the way that we've been doing it is we've been hooking up on Teams, on Skype, emailing the documentation over. Electrical highway. Yeah, so you'll have test certs that you can send over to us. You can send the internal audits over to us. You can send your management review over to us. all that documentation we can audit remotely. It'll be down to the assessor on the day or prior to that, whether they need to split that and actually come to your property later on and complete that audit. But you will receive quite a thorough audit plan a couple of weeks beforehand. What system are you going to use for remote? Okay. Not sure I understand the question. If you're talking software, that's the auditor who's going to provide, yeah, that'll all be discussed with your auditor. If you want to get in touch with your key account manager, they'll be able to contact the auditor and they'll send you an email and a plan, and you can discuss all that with them and get that sorted. But they are working quite smoothly, the remote audits, so don't worry about it. Thanks very much, Jamie. Can't see any further questions. Oh, that's good. That's nice. We had a remote audit at the beginning of the month. It was very successful and worked very well. Teams, email and Skype. Brilliant. Okay. If you have sent, oh, hang on. Here's one. Sorry, bear with me. What evidence of planning around COVID-19 would the auditor expect to see? So for quality, the planning and the risk mitigation is obviously really important. So you might have a checklist that we saw at the beginning of the presentation. You might have risk assessments that you can show us. Some may argue that that falls under health and safety, but we are also looking at the responsibilities that the employer holds to the staff to ensure that they're in a safe, comfortable work environment. It's just really a case of, if you've got meeting minutes, if you've had meetings with your managers, if you've sent newsletters or any memos out to staff to show that you've planned, that you've given advice about the COVID-19, it's not going to affect all businesses at exactly the same level, and we accept that. So it's really just seeing what you can show us, that evidence that you've planned and you've led the team through. Internal auditing with 2 meters social distancing is tricky. Totally agree, but it can do it. We can do it. What happens if you're on a multi-site operation, unable to do internal audits at those sites? Okay, good question. Is there anybody else on the sites who can do those internal audits? If there's not, and those sites are operational, I would say that if every site is doing the same thing, including the one that you're doing the internal audit on, then you could adapt your audit plan and cite the COVID-19 as a reason. You know, health and safety side, the health and safety side, you can't get to it. But if there's anybody else who can do those internal audits, then I would highly suggest that you allow them to, and see what's going on that way. But if you've done an internal audit for the main site, then I think under the circumstances that we could certainly accept that. What objectives would you expect to see for manufacturing? So again, it's whatever brings value. So for manufacturing, you might want to put an objective of reducing your waste. I say waste, not for any environmental reason, but more for cost. So anything that we're producing that could be used for something else, that's worth exploring. You might want to look more at your forecasting as well. So if you've slowed down production, when are you going to get back into the production, and put some pretty stringent time frames in place for that. Again, that's probably something that you already do, but you might not associate it with a quality objective, but it's good to see. So I'm just trying to see if I've missed. I understand that systems related clauses can be done remotely, but manufacturing processes. So again, manufacturing processes, if it's something that we need to see, then we will make an appointment with you later on in the year. What we're trying to do is ensure that we are helping you keep your certification going, and also the idea behind it is that we're not going to be stealing a day off you, so to speak. So we understand business is going to be really, really busy once you get back into the throw of things. By not missing your audit, though, we're not also coming back and taking up your time later in the year. It'll be much, much shorter. Okay, what about when the full compliance team have been furloughed? Would you say this is a risk? It's really for the company to decide. If the company has decided that compliance need to go on furlough because there's nothing for them to do, then that's the company decision. It also depends what operations are functioning or not at the moment. So apologies if that's a bit of a woolly answer, but without knowing anything about the business or the reason behind it, I can't offer much more of an opinion on that. And Terry Fisher, our health and safety principal assessor, he's brought up an excellent point that we can actually do virtual tours around your site as well, if you're able to get on, and we may be able to complete the audit in full by doing it that way. So I think I've covered all the questions. Again, if I've missed you, feel free to email me and we will capture all the feedback. Thanks ever so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.